Make sure he reads it. That was what the man said right before his fist connected with her face. Rosa didn't scream. She hit the driveway hard, one knee, then both palms, and by the time she looked up, he was already gone. But the note was still there, pressed into her bleeding hand, like it had been placed there by someone who had been planning this moment for a very, very long time. She got inside. She made it as far as the kitchen floor, and that was where Richard Calloway found her curled against the cabinet, one eye swollen shut, fingers locked around a folded piece of paper, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. He picked up that note, and his entire life cracked open. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Make sure he reads it. Rosa Mendez had been replaying those 4 words for the past 20 minutes, lying on the cold kitchen tile, pressing her palm against her eye socket and trying to breathe through the pain that was radiating from her jaw all the way up to her temple. She wasn't crying. She had decided somewhere between the driveway and the back door that she was not going to cry. She had been through worse than this. She told herself that even though right now in this moment she wasn't entirely sure it was true, she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Richard Calloway right on schedule, 7:45, exactly, and she thought briefly about trying to get up before he reached the kitchen. She even moved her arm, but the room tilted sideways in a way that changed her mind. The door swung open. His coffee mug hit the floor before he said a single word. Rosa. He was beside her in seconds, down on one knee, his hand hovering near her shoulder like he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch her. Rosa, what happened? Who did this? I'm fine, she said, which was such an obvious lie that she almost laughed at herself for saying it. You are not fine. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who was managing something large inside his chest. I'm calling 911. No. She grabbed his wrist. Her grip surprised them both. No police, please. You need a hospital. I need 1 minute, she said. Please, just 1 minute. He looked at her face. She watched him take in the damage, the eye, the lip, the bruise already darkening along her jaw, and she watched something move through his expression that she'd never seen on him before. In 6 years of working for this man, Rosa Mendez had seen Richard Calloway express approximately 4 emotions: mild approval, mild disapproval, distracted politeness in the blank. Careful nothing he wore like a second skin. What was on his face right now was none of those things. It looked, if she had to name it, like guilt. Okay, he said quietly. 1 minute. He found the first aid kit, the one she'd reorganized under the sink 3 times until it was actually useful, and he worked without speaking. Cold cloth to her eye, clean gauze on her lip. He was careful, more careful than she expected. She let him do it. That surprised her. In 6 years, she had never let this man do anything for her, not carry groceries in from the car, not hold a door, not pour her so much as a glass of water. She had always been very clear about what she was here to do and what the boundaries were. But right now, those boundaries felt very far away, and the cold cloth against her eye felt like the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a long time, and she was too tired to be proud about it. When he finished, he sat back and looked at her. Tell me what happened. There was an envelope on the front step when I arrived, she said. My name was on it. I picked it up. I was standing in the driveway reading it when, She stopped, steadied herself. A man came from behind the hedgerow. He didn't say anything. She touched her jaw lightly. He hit me, and then he pressed the note into my hand and he said, make sure he reads it. And then he was gone. Richard had gone absolutely still. What did he look like? I didn't see his face. He was behind me. Voice age. Older, 60, maybe older. Strong. She paused. He didn't hesitate. He knew exactly what he was doing. Richard stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the driveway, the hedgerow, the quiet residential street beyond, and Rosa watched the muscles in his jaw work like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. Show me the note, he said. She hesitated. He turned from the window. Rosa, I need you to tell me something first, she said. His eyes narrowed just slightly. What? Have you ever heard the name Elena Vasquez? The change in his face was immediate. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a flinch or a gasp or any of the things you'd see in a movie. It was subtler than that and somehow more devastating. It was the almost imperceptible collapse of a very old wall, The way a man's face goes when a name hits somewhere it was never supposed to reach. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "The note," Rosa said. "She's in the note." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and sat down at the table across from her, and Rosa realized for the first time truly that her employer of 6 years was afraid. Not of her, of the paper in her hand. "Read it to me," he said. Rosa unfolded it. The paper was good quality, thick cream-colored, and the handwriting was small, cramped, tilted left. Someone had written this carefully. Someone had thought about every word. She cleared her throat. "The man you work for is not who you think he is. His name was not always Richard Calloway. 28 years ago, he was responsible for the death of a young woman named Elena Vasquez. She was 23 years old. She was carrying his child. He abandoned her. She died alone. He changed his name and disappeared and has lived comfortably with that sin for nearly 3 decades. Ask him about Millhaven. Ask him about Route 9. Ask him what his real name is. And ask yourself, do you really know who you've been working for?" The kitchen was so quiet Rosa could hear the refrigerator hum. She lowered the note and looked at him. Richard Calloway, or whoever he was staring at the center of the table. His hands were flat on the surface, pressing down like he needed the solidity of something real beneath his palms. "Millhaven," she said, "not a question. A test." He looked up slowly. "I know Millhaven," he said. Rosa's breath left her in a slow, controlled stream. "Were you born there?" "I grew up there." His voice was even careful, the voice of a man choosing each word like he was picking his way across ice. "A long time ago." "And your name?" she asked. A long silence. "Robert," he said finally. "Robert Crane." Rosa sat with that for a moment. Robert Crane. She turned the name over in her mind. It didn't fit him, or maybe it fit a version of him she'd never met, a younger version. A version that existed before. Whatever happened in Millhaven turned him into this closed-off, careful, solitary man. "Tell me about Elena Vasquez," she said. "Rosa, you said you'd tell me the truth." Her voice was steady. "Was she real?" "Yes." The word came out like it cost him something. "She was real. She was pregnant with your child." He closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." "And she died." "Yes." "And you left before she died." It wasn't a question, and he didn't try to make it one. "Yes," he said. Rosa looked at this man, this tall, composed, silver-haired man who paid her on time every week and left polite notes about what needed to be done, and never once in 6 years raised his voice or asked her anything personal, and she felt something complicated moving through her. Not sympathy exactly, not anger exactly, something in between. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a very deep thing and not being sure you wanted to see the bottom. "How did she die?" she asked. Richard exhaled slowly. "Complications," he said. "She went into labor too early. She was alone, no family nearby, no money for proper care. He stopped, started again. She didn't make it, neither did the baby. And you didn't know? I found out 3 months later." He pressed his lips together. "I drove back to Millhaven. I stood at her grave. And I made a decision that day. I couldn't keep living as Robert Crane. I couldn't look at that name. So I changed it. Changed everything. Moved across the country. And you never told anyone. Almost no one. Almost," he shifted. "My lawyer knew, because of the legal paperwork. And my father." Rosa's eyes sharpened. "Your father. He was the reason I left in the first place." Something darker moved through his voice now. "Elena wasn't the kind of woman my father thought his son should be with. He made that extremely clear. I was 23 years old and I was a coward, and I let him make that choice for me." He looked up. "I've regretted it every single day since." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Who else knew about Elena, about what you did? Who was angry enough to track you down after 28 years and send a note like this?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Elena had a younger brother, Marco. He was 16 when she died. He paused. "Someone told me later that at the funeral he made a public promise, in front of everyone, that he would find the man responsible and make him face what he'd done." "How old would Marco be now?" Rosa asked. 43, 44. Rosa shook her head slowly. "The man who hit me this morning was not 43. He was at least 60. maybe older. The color that left Richard's face in that moment was so sudden and so complete that Rosa instinctively reached out toward him. He was already reaching for his phone. He dialed a number from memory. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. He hung up. He dialed again, a different number this time. 2 rings, then a bright professional voice. Sunnyside Senior Living. How can I help you? Raymond Crane, he said. Room 14B, it's urgent. Keyboard clicks. A pause that lasted just a beat too long. I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Crane is no longer a resident with us. Richard's hand went white around the phone. What do you mean? He's 78 years old. He can't just... He was discharged 2 weeks ago, picked up by the family member. All the paperwork was signed. A careful pause. Are you family, sir? Richard lowered the phone. He stood in the middle of his kitchen, his quiet, safe, meticulously controlled kitchen, and Rosa watched him absorb the information. She watched him put the pieces together. She watched his face go from shock to understanding to something that was almost but not quite fear. Your father, she said softly. You think it was your father? He turned and looked at her. My father is the only other person who knew everything. The whole truth. He was there. He stopped. He was the one who told me to leave in the first place. So why would he come after you now? Rosa asked. After all this time, I don't know. And why through me? She pressed. He could have sent that note to you directly. He could have come to your door. Why put it in my hand? Why hit me and put it in my hand? Richard looked at her for a long moment. It was a good question. A better question than he wanted to deal with right now, because the answer that was forming in the back of his mind was one that required him to acknowledge something he had been trying very hard not to acknowledge for the past 20 minutes. Something about the nature of this attack, about what it meant that his father hadn't come to him directly. A message sent through the person closest to him wasn't just a message. It was a declaration. It said, I know your life. I know your routines. I know who matters to you, even if you don't know it yourself. I know that this woman is the closest thing you have to another human being in your daily existence. And I want you to know that I know. He said none of that out loud. Instead, he said, I need you to stay here today. Don't go home. Rosa blinked. Excuse me. I don't want you alone until I understand what's happening. Please. Mr. Calloway. Richard, he said with a kind of exhausted insistence. Or Robert. I honestly, at this point, I don't know which one to use. She looked at him for a long moment. That complicated feeling moved through her again, that mixture of things she didn't have clean names for. Then she said, What are you not telling me? He blinked. What? There's something else, she said. I can see it. You're holding something back. He opened his mouth, closed it. Elena's brother, Rosa said carefully. Marco, you said he made a promise at the funeral. A public promise. Have you ever in 28 years ever tried to find him or reach out to Elena's family at all? A long silence. Once, Richard said. About 15 years ago, I tried to find Marco. I wanted to, I don't know, apologize, explain, give them something. I hired someone to find him. And they found him, he said, in Phoenix. The words sat there between them like a stone dropped in still water, and Rosa watched the ripples move across Richard's face as he heard himself say it and realized simultaneously, visibly, horribly, exactly what it meant. Marco Vasquez, in Phoenix. The same city where Raymond Crane had been living for the past 11 years. Oh God, Richard said quietly. Rosa's voice was very steady when she spoke. Your father and Elena's brother are both in Phoenix. Were, Richard said. My father left 2 weeks ago. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Outside on the quiet street, that car Rosa hadn't noticed when she arrived, the dark sedan parked just beyond the hedgerow sat still and silent, its engine off a single figure behind the wheel, who had not moved in 40 minutes and who showed no sign of moving now. Because there was no rush. The note had been delivered. The message had been received. And the next move was already in motion. Richard was still staring at the wall when Rosa spoke again. Call him, she said. Call your father right now. Don't wait. He's not answering. Then call the retirement home back and get a contact number for whoever signed him out. She was already pushing herself up from the kitchen chair, one hand braced on the table, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body hurt, but whose mind had decided to override it. There has to be a name on that discharge paperwork. A family member, An emergency contact. Someone signed your father out of that facility, and that name is sitting in their system right now. Richard looked at her. For a moment, he just looked at her, this woman he had employed for 6 years and barely spoken to, who was now standing in his kitchen with a bruised face and a split lip, telling him what to do with the quiet authority of someone who had been solving problems without help for a very long time. He dialed Sunnyside back. The same bright professional voice answered. He asked for the name on the discharge authorization. She put him on hold. He stood at the counter and listened to elevator music for 90 seconds that felt like 90 minutes. And then she came back and said, "I'm sorry, sir, that information is confidential. We can only release it to—" "I'm his son," Richard said. "His legal next of kin. My name is on his original intake forms. Richard Calloway." He spelled it out. Check. Another hold. Rosa was watching him from across the kitchen with her arms folded and her good eyes steady and her jaw set with a kind of grim patience that reminded him absurdly of a very tired general. The woman came back. "Mr. Calloway, according to our records, Mr. Raymond Crane listed one emergency contact. A Mr. Marco Vasquez." She paused. "He was listed as a family friend." Richard set the phone on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are shaking and you don't want anyone to know. Rosa had heard. He could see it on her face. "They know each other," she said. "Your father and Elena's brother. They are not strangers who happen to both live in Phoenix. They are what friends, partners." "I don't know how long," Richard said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know when they found each other. I don't know what my father told him, what Marco told my father, what they built together over however many years they've been." He stopped, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. "I cut my father off 11 years ago. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. I told myself it was because of everything he'd done, everything he represented. But the truth is, he lowered his hands. "The truth is, I couldn't look at him without seeing Elena. And your father," Rosa said slowly, "spent those 11 years of silence making a new family." She said it without cruelty, just directness. "With the brother of the woman you abandoned." The word abandoned hit the air between them clean and unadorned, and neither of them pretended it didn't. "What does Marco want?" Richard asked. "After 28 years, what does he actually want from me? An apology, money to watch me suffer?" "People who wait 28 years," Rosa said, "usually don't want an apology." The sentence landed like a stone through glass. Richard moved to the window, not to look at the yard this time, but because he needed to move, needed to put his body somewhere that his mind could catch up with it. He stood with his back to her. Outside, a neighbor walked a dog. A delivery truck rolled past. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, doing its perfectly ordinary thing, completely indifferent to the fact that his entire life was currently coming apart at the seams in his own kitchen. "I need to find my father," he said. "We need to figure out who is in that car first," Rosa said. He spun around. "What car?" "Dark sedan, parked just past your fence line. It was there when I arrived this morning and it has not moved." She said it calmly, factually, the way she'd once told him the upstairs bathroom faucet was dripping and needed a new washer. "I noticed it before the man in the driveway. I thought it was just a neighbor, but it has not moved in over an hour." Richard went to the window closest to the front of the house and looked out at an angle, careful not to stand directly in front of the glass. It took him 3 seconds to find it. Dark blue 4-door, 2 houses down on the opposite side of the street. He couldn't make out the plate from here. He couldn't make out the person inside. But there was a person inside. He was certain of that. "How long?" he asked. "It was there when I turned onto your street," Rosa said. "Maybe 7:30, 7:25. Which meant it had been there before the attack. Whoever was in that car had watched the man in the driveway assault Rosa, press the note into her hand, and walk away, and had done nothing. Had just watched. "They're not here to stop anything," Richard said. "They're here to watch, to make sure the message landed." "Or to watch what you do next," Rosa said. He turned away from the window. His mind was moving fast now, faster than it had moved in years, maybe faster than it had moved since he was Robert Crane, 23 years old, running from something he should have stayed and faced. He recognized the feeling. Not good, but familiar. "I have a friend," he said, "Gus Hartley. We've known each other since before Millhaven. He's a retired detective out of Cincinnati. If I send him the plate number, he can run it without going through official channels." Can you get the plate number without going outside? Maybe. He was already moving toward the hallway. I have a camera on the porch. I can pull up the feed on my laptop if the angle's right. I might be able to catch part of the plate when the car came in. He was back in 4 minutes with his laptop open. Rosa moved around the table and stood beside him, close, but not touching, and they both looked at the grainy footage from the front porch camera. It was timestamped 7:18 a.m., a dark sedan moving slowly into frame parking. The angle was wrong for a full plate read, but the last three characters were visible. W4R. It's something, and Rosa said. He texted Gus Hartley, dark blue sedan, partial plate, W4R, last 2 hours my street. Need owner ID, don't ask questions yet. Gus responded in under a minute because Gus Hartley had been retired for 6 years and bored for all 6 of them. Give me 20. Richard set the phone on the table. 20 minutes. He looked at Rosa. Sit down, he said. You shouldn't be standing. I'm fine. Rosa, please sit down. She sat. Not because he asked her to, he suspected, but because her legs had decided to agree with him, even if she hadn't. He made coffee. He didn't ask if she wanted any. He just made it 2 cups and set one in front of her, and she wrapped both hands around it without a word. They sat across the table from each other in a silence that was nothing like the silences of the past 6 years. Those silences had been professional, easy, comfortable in the way that 2 people who aren't really paying attention to each other can be comfortable. This silence was different. This one had weight. This one knew things. Can I ask you something? Rosa said. Yes. Elena, she paused. What was she like? Richard looked at his coffee. Wiped down. Because you talked about your father, about Marco, about the name change, about all the logistics of what happened. But you haven't talked about her. Not really. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She was the kind of person who made you feel like you were more than you actually turned. Like she saw some version of you that you hadn't quite grown into yet, but might if you had enough time. He paused. She laughed easily. She was always warm. She used to leave little notes, just ordinary thing, grocery lists, reminders, but she'd put a small drawing in the corner of each one. A tiny bird or a sun or a crooked star. She didn't even realize she was doing it half the time. It was just who she was. Rosa was quiet. I think about those drawings sometimes, he said, more than I think about anything else. Do you think about the baby? He set his coffee down. Every day of my life, he said. Every single day. The rawness of it, the flatness of his voice when he said it, the complete absence of any performance seemed to settle over the kitchen like something physical. Rosa looked at this man, this stranger, this person she had spent 6 years not knowing. I'm going to tell you something, she said carefully, and I need you to hear it without reacting right away. He looked up. I was 17 when I came to this country, she said. From Guadalajara. I had a baby, a boy. I was alone, the father had left, my family had nothing, I had nothing. I worked 3 jobs, I did everything I could. She stopped. He was sick. From the beginning, he was sick, and I didn't have the money for the kind of care he needed, and she pressed her lips together. He died before his 2nd birthday. Richard didn't speak. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me, Rosa continued. I'm telling you because when I read that note this morning, when I read about Elena, about what she went through alone, no money, no family nearby, I didn't feel angry at you the way I expected to. I felt, she stopped again, seemed to search for the word. I felt like I understood how a person could be surrounded by people and still die alone. And I felt like maybe that's the thing you've been carrying, not just the guilt of leaving, but the knowledge of exactly what that loneliness looks like. Richard Calloway sat very still. I'm sorry, he said, and it was clear from the way he said it that he was not just apologizing for Elena. He was apologizing for something he'd never been able to put into a sentence before, something he hadn't had a witness for, and Rosa Mendez, without intending to, without being asked, had just become that witness. Don't apologize to me, she said quietly. Apologize to the people who need to hear it. His phone buzzed. Gus Hartley. He looked at the screen, read the message, read it again. Then he put the phone on the table face up so Rosa could see it too. Plate registered to a Patricia Crane. Address in Scottsdale, Arizona. You got family in Scottsdale, buddy. Rosa read it. Then she looked at Richard. Patricia Crane. My father's sister, he said, my aunt. She's God. She must be 80 by now. I haven't spoken to her since. He stopped. She was at Elena's funeral. She went even though my father forbade anyone in the family from going. She went and she stood in the back and she left before anyone could talk to her. I always thought she went because she felt ashamed. Ashamed of what we'd done. So your aunt's car is parked outside your house, Rosa said. Yes. Is she in it? I don't know. Then go find out. He looked at her. Go, she said. Open the front door, walk to the car, and find out. And whatever's happening, whatever your father and Marco have been planning, your aunt drove here from Arizona. That means something. She didn't have to come. She chose to come. And she's been sitting outside your house for over an hour without knocking. Richard stood up from the table. He walked down the hall, unlocked the front door, and stepped outside for the first time that morning into the cool Tuesday air. He crossed the front yard. He opened the gate. He walked to the driver's side of the dark blue sedan and knocked on the window. The window rolled down. The woman behind it was 81 years old, small and white-haired, with the same sharp cheekbones that Robert Crane had always had, that Richard Calloway had never quite been able to get rid of. She was looking at him with an expression that contained approximately 50 years of complicated things, grief and relief and apology, and something that might have been love, the worn-down, long-suffering kind. Bobby, she said. The old name, the real name. She hadn't called him that since he was 23 years old. He had to put one hand on the roof of the car to steady himself. Aunt Patricia, he said. Get in, she said. Please, we don't have a lot of time. He got in the passenger seat. He closed the door. The inside of the car smelled like lavender and old leather, and for one insane moment it smelled like every family occasion he'd ever tried to forget Christmas at his parents' house. Summer cookouts, the particular safety of being someone's nephew, someone's son, before all of that curdled. You should have hit me, he said, instead of Rosa. That wasn't me, she said immediately. I want you to understand that. I did not know that was going to happen. I drove here to warn you, Bobby. I drove 14 hours because, her voice caught, because I think what's happening has gone further than anyone intended and someone is going to get hurt. Someone already got hurt, he said. My housekeeper is sitting in my kitchen right now with a split lip and a bruised eye. Patricia closed her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That was Marco. He's not a stable person. He hasn't been for a long time. Your father doesn't see it, or he sees it and he tells himself it's justified. What are they planning? Richard asked. The two of them. What is this? She opened her eyes and looked at him with the directness of an 81-year-old woman who has run out of time for softening things. They've been planning this for 4 years, she said. Your father reached out to Marco in Phoenix, not the other way around. Raymond contacted him. They met. They found out they both hated you for different reasons and for the same reason, and that was enough. She paused. Marco has been collecting information about you for years. Your address, your routines, your finances, the woman who works in your house. He has a file on you, Bobby. It's thick. A file. Richard stared through the windshield. What do they want? What is the end goal? Marco wants to expose you, she said. He has a lawyer. He's been building a case for some kind of civil action, wrongful death, emotional damages, whatever they can make stick after this many years. But that's not the part that worries me. She turned to face him fully and her voice dropped. Your father told Marco something. About 2 months ago. Something I don't think Raymond ever intended to tell anyone. Richard turned to look at her. He told Marco, she said, that Elena didn't die from complications. The silence in the car was total. What did you say? Richard asked. He told Marco that the hospital in Millhaven where Elena was taken had a record, a report, that said she had been brought in too late, that there had been a delay in calling for help. Patricia's voice was steady, but barely, and that the person who was with her when that delay happened was Raymond Crane. Richard's entire body went cold. My father was there, he said. When Elena went into labor, my father was there. He drove to Millhaven the night it happened, Patricia said. I didn't know until he told Marco. I never knew. He went there, I don't know why. I don't know what he intended, but he was in Millhaven that night, and Elena was taken to the hospital, and she died, and your father, she stopped. Your father came home and never said a word about it, to anyone. Ever, until he told Marco. Richard's hand was on the door handle before she finished the sentence. Bobby. He was there, Richard said. He was there and she died, and he never... His voice broke apart, and he put it back together by force alone. He let me spend 28 years thinking she died because I wasn't there. He let me carry that. I know, Patricia said. I know. Why? Richard asked. Why would he tell Marco now? After all this time, why would he? Because he's 78 years old and he's dying, she said quietly. Congestive heart failure. He has maybe 6 months, and I think God help him. I think he wanted someone to know. Even if that someone was Marco Vasquez, even if it destroyed everything, he needed to say it out loud before he ran out of time. Richard got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk in the Tuesday morning air, and he breathed. In and out. In and out. The neighbor's sprinkler system had started up again across the street, ticking rhythmically through its cycle, and somewhere 2 houses down, a dog was barking at something it would never catch, and the world was continuing to operate with complete indifference to the fact that everything Richard Calloway had believed about the worst thing he'd ever done had just been dismantled in the front seat of an old woman's car. He had always believed Elena died because he left. That had been his truth for 28 years. His guilt, his sentence, the weight he'd chosen to carry because he'd decided it was his to carry. But his father had been there. His father had been in Millhaven that night, and his father had never said a word. He turned back to the car. Patricia was watching him through the windshield. He opened the door. Where is my father right now? He asked. With Marco, she said. In a motel about 12 miles from here. I have the address. Give it to me. She hesitated. Bobby, give me the address to Patricia. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and handed him a folded piece of paper. Not like the note, not cream-colored and carefully creased, but a torn corner of a CVS receipt with an address written on it in shaky ballpoint. He took it. He walked back to his house. He pushed open the front door, walked down the hall, and stood in the kitchen doorway. Rosa was still at the table. She had both hands around her coffee cup, and she was watching him the way she'd been watching him all morning with those dark, steady eyes that didn't miss a single thing. Well, she said. He put the motel address on the table in front of her. My father was in Millhaven the night Elena died, he said. He was there. He's been hiding it for 28 years. Rosa looked at the address, then up at him. And you're going to him, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Then I'm coming with you, she said. He opened his mouth to argue. She raised one hand and he closed it again. You said I should stay here because it wasn't safe, she said. But you're the one who's about to walk into a room with a dying man who has spent the past 4 years building a case against you and the brother of a woman you wronged who is angry enough to assault a stranger in a driveway. She paused. I am not letting you go alone. Richard looked at her across the table. This woman who owed him nothing, who had been hurt this morning because of his past, who was sitting in his kitchen with a bruised face telling him she would not let him go alone. Why, he said. She picked up the address, folded it once, slid it into her pocket. Because, she said, somebody in that room needs to be the person who tells the truth. And I'm starting to think that person is not going to be you. They didn't speak much in the car. Rosa had insisted on driving. Her eye was swollen, but her hands were steady, and Richard looked like a man who should not be trusted with a steering wheel right now. He didn't argue. He sat in the passenger seat of her 10-year-old Honda with the CVS receipt in his hand and stared at the address like it was a foreign language he was trying to translate. And Rosa drove the way she did everything quietly, efficiently, and without wasting a single motion. 12 miles felt like 100. Somewhere around mile 4, Richard said, You don't have to do this. I know, she said. Rosa, seriously, whatever happens in that room, it has nothing to do with you. You've already been hurt once today because of me. I can't ask you to walk into me. You're not asking, she said. I'm telling. There's a difference. She checked her mirror, merged lanes, and stopped trying to talk me out of things. It wastes time. He looked at her as she kept her eyes on the road. 6 years, he said quietly. I never knew anything about you. Not really. You never asked. I should have. Yes, she agreed. You should have. She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it sting more than bitterness would have. He looked back out the window. After your son died, what did you do? She was quiet for a moment. I kept working, I kept moving. I told myself grief was a luxury I couldn't afford, so I just didn't stop. If you don't stop, you don't have to feel it. That's what I believed. A pause. It doesn't work, by the way, in case you were wondering. I know, he said. You've been doing the same thing, she said, for 28 years. Different house, different name, same strategy. She glanced at him briefly, running and working and keeping everything perfectly quiet so nothing can get in. I recognize it because I did it too. Richard said nothing, but she saw his hand tighten on the CVS receipt. The difference, Rosa continued, is that I eventually ran out of places to run to. And when I did, I had to sit down and actually be a person again. She signaled for the turn. I think today is the day you run out of places. He exhaled slowly. What if I don't know how to do that anymore? You're already doing it, she said. You just don't realize it yet. She pulled into the motel parking lot and cut the engine. It was a mid-range chain motel, the kind with exterior corridor doors and a vending machine by the ice maker, in a parking lot that had seen better decades. Room 114. Ground floor, curtains drawn, a rental car parked directly in front Arizona plates. Richard stared at the door for a long moment. How do you want to do this? Rosa asked. I have no idea, he said honestly. Do you want me to go first? He looked at her. Why would you go first? Because they're expecting you to come in angry, she said. If I go first, the woman from the note, the woman who got hit this morning, Marco won't know how to read that. It disrupts whatever script they've been running in their heads. People who have been planning something for 4 years always have a script. You disrupt the script and they lose their footing. Richard stared at her. You've thought about this for the last 12 miles. I had nothing else to do. You were staring at a receipt. Despite everything, despite the bruised face and the split lip and the fear sitting cold in his chest, Richard almost smiled, almost. Okay, he said. You go first. They got out of the car. They walked to room 114. Rosa knocked twice clean and deliberate. Silence. Then movement behind the curtain. The door opened. The man standing in the doorway was in his mid-40s, but he looked older. The kind of older that grief and anger do to a face over decades. He was dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with deep-set eyes that went immediately from Rosa to Richard and back to Rosa, with an expression that shifted through about 6 emotions in under 2 seconds. Shock, confusion, guilt, real guilt, the involuntary kind at the bruise on her face. Then the guilt closed over and what replaced it was something harder. You brought her here, he said to Richard over Rosa's shoulder. I brought myself, Rosa said. Marco Vasquez looked at her, really looked at her. At the swollen eye, the cut lip, the way she was standing upright, squared with the posture of someone who refused to be diminished. I didn't tell him to hurt you, Marco said. That wasn't, I didn't authorize that. But you knew it was a possibility, Amal, Rosa said. When you sent a stranger to deliver a message through me. He had no answer for that. His jaw tightened. He stepped back from the door. They went in. The room was small, 2 beds, a table, a chair, and in the chair by the window, wrapped in a cardigan, despite the warmth, smaller than Richard remembered, somehow both ancient and familiar, was Raymond Crane. 78 years old, white-haired, hands folded in his lap. He looked up when Richard entered the room, and the look on his face was not what Richard expected. It was not defiance. It was not victory. It was not even the cold disapproval that had defined Richard's entire childhood. It was relief, which was the most unsettling thing Richard Calloway had ever seen on another human face. Bobby, his father said. Don't, Richard said. The word came out harder than he intended. He was across the room in 3 steps, standing over his father, and his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Don't call me that. Don't sit there looking at me like you've been waiting for this, like it's some kind of homecoming. You know what you did. You know what you kept from me. Raymond Crane did not flinch. He looked up at his son, and he nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence that had been a long time coming. I know, he said. You were there, Richard said. The night Elena went into labor. You were in Mill Haven. Yes. And she died. Yes. And you never told me. Richard's voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, and he hated himself for it. 28 years. I spent 28 years believing she died because I wasn't there. Because I left. I carried that. I changed my name. I destroyed my entire life because I believed. I know what you believed, Raymond said quietly. Then tell me why, Richard said. Right now. Look at me and tell me why. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Marco was standing by the bathroom door with his arms folded watching. Rosa had moved to the far corner of the room present, but not intruding, bearing witness in the careful way she seemed to do everything. I went to Millhaven to talk to her, Raymond said finally. I want to be clear about that. I didn't go there to hurt her. I went to talk. I had heard someone had told me she was still planning to contact you, that she wanted to try again to reach you to tell you about the baby, and I couldn't allow that. So you went to stop her, Richard said. I went to persuade her, Raymond said, and the distinction clearly still mattered to him, even now after all this time, which told Richard everything he needed to know about his father. I brought money. I thought if I gave her enough, she would agree to disappear quietly. Let you move on. Let the whole thing be finished. The room was very still. She refused, Richard said. She refused, Raymond confirmed. She told me to leave. She was further along than I'd realized. She was in pain, I think, even during that conversation, though. I didn't understand at the time what was happening. I was angry. We argued. I said things I am not proud of. And then I left. You left, Richard repeated. I left. And I was down the street into my car, and I saw her neighbor come out and find her on the steps, and the neighbor called 911, and He stopped. His folded hands tightened against each other. I drove away. The silence that followed was so complete and so heavy that it seemed to press down on everything in the room. She needed help, Richard said. His voice was almost a whisper. She was in labor, and she was alone, and you drove away. Yes, Raymond said, just that. One word. No justification, no explanation, no softening. For the first time in Richard's memory, his father did not try to make himself smaller by making someone else's pain smaller. First, from the bathroom doorway, Marco Vasquez made a sound. Not a word, just a sound low and tight. The sound of a person who has heard this story before and still cannot absorb it. He told me 2 months ago, Marco said. His voice was different from what Richard expected, not hot, not explosive, but exhausted. The exhaustion of a man who has been angry for so long, the anger has started to hollow him out. I spent 28 years thinking your sister died because some rich coward left her alone. I spent 28 years building that story in my head, that clean story, and then this man, he pointed at Raymond without looking at him. This man calls me out of nowhere and tells me he was there. He was there and he left her on the steps and he drove away. Marco's jaw worked. I don't know what to do with that. I have had that information for 2 months and I genuinely do not know what to do with it. Richard turned to look at Marco Vasquez for the first time. Really look at him. This man who had grown up carrying the same weight Richard carried, but from the other side. This man who had lost his sister and his nephew and had spent nearly 3 decades directing his grief into something that felt like purpose. She talked about you, Richard said. Elena. She said you were the funniest person she knew. Marco's expression collapsed for just a half second before he rebuilt it. Don't, he said. I'm not trying to. I just want you to know that she talked about you constantly. She was proud of you. She said you were going to be somebody that you had too much fire in you to stay small. Richard paused. She was right. She's dead, Marco said flatly. I know. She's dead and her son is dead, and you changed your name and bought a big house and hired someone to clean it, and my father drank himself into an early grave and my mother never recovered, and I spent 20 years in a job I hated because I couldn't think far enough ahead to plan anything else. His voice was rising now, not with rage, but with something rawer than that. So don't tell me she was proud of me. Don't do that. I won't, Richard said. I'm sorry. He stopped. The word sorry felt so inadequate in this room that he almost couldn't say it at all. There is nothing I can say to you that is enough. I know that. I knew it the moment I stood at her grave, and I have known it every day since. There is no amount of apology that equals what your family lost. I'm not here to offer you a transaction. Marco looked at him. Then why are you here? Because my father was there, Richard said, and that changes things. Not for you, I understand if it changes nothing for you. But for me, I need to know the complete truth, all of it, not just the version I've been carrying. He turned back to his father. Raymond was watching him with those old tired eyes, and Richard thought, this is a man who has been carrying this secret for 28 years too. Not with guilt the way Richard had carried his guilt, because Raymond Crane was not built for guilt in the same way, but with something. Something that had driven him at 78 and dying to call Marco Vasquez in Phoenix and say I was there. As if confession to a stranger was the only form of absolution he could still access. The hospital report, Richard said. Patricia mentioned a hospital report about the delay. Raymond nodded. The paramedics noted the time of the call and the progression of her condition. Their assessment was that she had been in distress for several hours before the call was made. The report went into her file and stayed there. He paused. I have a copy. Richard blinked. You kept a copy. I've had it for 28 years, Raymond said, in a lockbox. I don't know why I kept it. I told myself it was to protect myself in case it ever surfaced. But I think he stopped. I think I kept it because I couldn't destroy it, because destroying it would have meant being able to live with myself completely, and I was never quite able to do that. Where is the lockbox? Richard asked. In my bag, Raymond said, under the bed. Everyone in the room went still. Marco straightened. You brought it here. I brought everything. Raymond said simply, when Patricia drove me out of Phoenix, yes, I knew she was driving here. I knew she was going to warn Bobby. I brought everything. Because it's time. He looked up at Richard. It's time for all of it to be out in the world. Whatever that means. Whatever happens to me. He glanced briefly at Marco. And to you. Marco's voice came out very quiet. If that report says what you told me, it says. It says what I told you it says, Raymond confirmed. Then you could face criminal charges, Marco said. At 78 years old dying, you could actually face charges for what happened to Elena. I know, Raymond said. And you're okay with that. Raymond looked at his son, not at Marco, at Richard. And the look was one that Richard would spend a very long time processing, because it was not the look of a man making a noble sacrifice. It was the look of a man who was simply finally too tired to keep something up. Bobby, he said, I need you to take the lockbox. Richard moved to the bed, got down on one knee, pulled the bag out. The lockbox was small metal black with a combination he'd never seen before. He looked up at his father. 2284, Raymond said. Your birthday, June. Something moved through Richard's chest that he couldn't name and didn't try to. He opened the lockbox. Inside, a folded hospital document, 28 years old, the paper yellowed at the edges and soft at the folds. A photograph, Elena young and laughing, standing in front of what looked like a diner, squinting into the sun, and a sealed envelope with a name on the front in Raymond's handwriting. The name on the envelope was not Richard's, it was Marco's. Richard held it up. Marco saw it from across the room and went very still. I wrote it 6 months ago, Raymond said, when I found out how much time I had left. I wrote it before I called Marco. I wanted him to have something from me that wasn't just a confession, something that tried to explain, if not justify. I'm not asking forgiveness. I know what I am. He looked at Marco directly for the first time since they'd been in the room together. I'm asking you to read it. That's all. Just read it. Marco crossed the room. He took the envelope from Richard's hand. He looked at it for a long moment, this sealed letter from the man who had stood by while his sister died, who had driven away and kept silent for 28 years, who had ended up in a Phoenix retirement home making friends with Marco's grief like it was the only family he had left. I'm going to read it, Marco said, but not here, not in front of... He stopped. He looked at Richard. He looked at Rosa, who had not moved from her corner the entire time, but whose presence had somehow shaped the entire atmosphere of the room, the way a steady hand on a ship's wheel shapes everything without making a sound. I need a minute. He walked out the door. Richard stood in the middle of the motel room, holding a 28-year-old hospital report and a photograph of the woman he had loved when he was young and stupid and not yet acquainted with the cost of cowardice. And he looked at his father. Raymond was watching the door Marco had just walked through. Will he be all right? Raymond asked. Not about Richard, about Marco. I don't know, Richard said honestly. He's a good man, Raymond said quietly. He's angry and he's been wounded, and he's done some things this week I can't condone. But he's a good man underneath it. Elena would have been proud of him. He paused. She would have been right. Richard looked down at the photograph in his hands. Elena squinting in the sun. Young, laughing, alive. Her hand raised slightly in front of her face like she was trying to block the light, but not quite like she didn't really want to block it, like she wanted to feel all of it, even if it was too bright. I'm going to do something with this report, Richard said. Whatever the legal consequences are for you for Marco's case for any of it, it needs to go to someone official, a lawyer, maybe a prosecutor. Not to destroy you, but because she deserves to have the truth on record somewhere. Raymond closed his eyes. I know, he said. I expected nothing less. You don't get to make this into something noble at the end, Richard said, and his voice was raw but even. You don't get a redemption arc from me. What you did was wrong. What you let happen was wrong. I'm going to love you and I'm going to hate you for the rest of my life, and both of those things are going to be true at the same time. Can you accept that? Raymond opened his eyes. Yes, he said. That's more than I deserve. Rosa spoke from her corner the first time she'd spoken since they entered the room. Her voice was calm and carried the particular weight of someone who has been listening so carefully that when they do speak, the room reorganizes itself around the words. Mr. Crane, she said, addressing Raymond, before anything else happens, before lawyers and reports and whatever comes next, I need to ask you something. Raymond looked at her. Yes. Did Elena know? Rosa asked. At the end, did she know that you had come to her? Did she know that someone from his family had been there? The question was not directed at Richard. It was directed at Raymond, and it was a question that had clearly not been asked before because something moved across the old man's face. Surprise and then pain, and then the particular devastation of a person confronted with something they have spent a very long time not thinking about. I don't know, he said. She was in pain when I left. I don't know if she was fully aware of, he stopped. I don't know. Then let me tell you what I know, Rosa said, and her voice did not waver. A woman in pain alone knows she is alone. She may not know exactly who has come and gone, but she knows that someone could have helped and chose not to. That knowledge, that specific knowledge, is the loneliest thing a human being can carry in their last hours. She paused. I know because I sat with my son while he was dying. And the loneliness was not that no one loved us. The loneliness was that love was not enough to make anyone stay. The room was completely silent. Raymond Crane, 78 years old, dying, who had not cried at any point in this conversation. Not when Richard confronted him, not when Marco walked out the door, put his face in his hands. The sound he made was not loud. It was actually very quiet. But it was the sound of something that had been sealed for a very long time, finally breaking its own container. Richard stood and watched his father cry. He didn't move toward him. He didn't move away. He just stood there, holding the photograph of Elena, and let the moment be what it was. Outside the door, they could hear Marco Vasquez pacing. Back and forth on the concrete walkway, the sound of his footsteps uneven and restless, a man reading a dead man's letter, a letter from his sister's killer's father, trying to figure out what kind of person it made him that he was still reading at all. Rosa moved to Richard's side. She didn't say anything. She simply stood there close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and that small proximity, that almost contact, was somehow enough. What do we do now? Richard asked. He wasn't asking about the report or the lawyer or any of the practical things. He was asking about the larger thing, the formless thing, the thing that existed in the space between all the damage that had been done and whatever came after it. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, we go outside and we talk to Marco, and then we figure out the next thing, and then the thing after that. That's it. That's all there ever is, she said. From behind the door, Raymond's crying had slowed to silence. Outside, Marco's pacing had stopped. Richard put the photograph in his shirt pocket. He picked up the hospital report. He looked at the door, and then he opened it. Marco was standing with his back against the exterior wall, the letter in one hand and the envelope in the other, staring at the parking lot like it owed him an answer. He didn't look up when the door opened. He knew it was Richard. He'd heard the handle turn, and he was clearly not ready, but he was also not walking away. And Richard had learned enough about Marco Vasquez in the last 20 minutes to understand that not walking away was its own kind of statement. Richard stopped a few feet from him, leaned his shoulder against the wall, didn't speak. They stood like that for almost a full minute. Then Marco said, he apologized in the letter. He said it the way you'd report something unbelievable. Flat careful, like if you put too much inflection on it, the words might become real. 78 years old dying, and he wrote me a 5-page letter on yellow legal paper, and he apologized. Like that's a thing that exists. Like that word still functions after what he did. Does it? Richard asked. For you. Marco finally looked at him. His eyes were dry, but red at the rims. I don't know. I've been angry for so long, I don't know what I am on the other side of it. He folded the letter slowly, slid it back in the envelope. I came here to destroy you. I want you to know that. That was the plan. The lawyer, the civil suit, the note making your housekeeper read it first, all of it was designed to take apart everything you'd built. Your reputation, your peace, whatever small, comfortable life you'd constructed on top of what you did. I know what Richard said, and now I'm standing in a motel parking lot holding a letter from the man who actually, Marco stopped. His jaw worked. The man who was actually there. It doesn't cancel what I did, Richard said. I want to be clear about that. My father being there doesn't make me innocent. I left Elena, I left her alone, and I chose not to go back, and that is mine. That belongs to me regardless of anything else. Marco looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said, and I hate you for it. I want you to know that too. I hate you, and I will probably hate you for the rest of my life, and that might never change. Okay, Richard said. But Marco exhaled a long, controlled breath like he was managing something enormous. But that man in that room, your father, he's the reason she died. Not just you, not just your cowardice, him. And I have spent 28 years pointing all of it at you because you were the one I knew about. Because you were the one with a face and a name and an address. He looked down at the envelope. He called me 6 months ago and introduced himself, and I thought he was reaching out to help me, to give me information to use against you. And he was. But he was also, Marco's voice dropped. He was also a lonely, dying old man who needed someone to tell. And you were the only person who would understand, Richard said quietly. That's the sick part, Marco said. That's the part I can't get past. He chose me. Out of everyone. He reached out to the one person in the world whose pain was the mirror of his secret. And for 6 months I've been going to dinner with this man. We've been watching baseball. He came to my daughter's birthday party. His voice cracked on the last word just barely, and he put it back together with visible effort. My daughter is 12 years old, and she calls him Mr. Ray. And I didn't know, I thought I knew everything, but I didn't know the worst part until 2 months ago, and by then He stopped, shook his head. By then you loved him, Richard said. The word hit Marco like a physical thing. He flinched. Then he laughed a short, broken sound that contained absolutely no humor. Don't say that. Is it true? A long silence. He's the only person left, Marco said, who remembers what she looked like when she laughed. My parents are gone. My cousins, we scattered. The people who knew her are mostly gone, and the ones who are left remember a tragedy, not a person. But Raymond, your father, he met her. He sat across from her in an argument, and he saw her fight for what she wanted, and he was too small a man to let her have it, but he saw her. He remembers her. Marco looked at Richard. Does that make me pathetic? No, Richard said. It makes you human. Rosa appeared in the doorway behind them. She looked at Marco's face, then at Richard's, and she made a rapid, quiet assessment the way she always did, and she said, There's something you both need to know. Your father told me while you were out here. They both turned. Rosa stepped outside, pulling the door almost closed behind her. He has the name of the paramedic who responded that night. The one who wrote the hospital report. He's been in contact with him. She paused. The paramedic is still alive. He's 73 retired lives in Columbus. And according to your father, he's been carrying his own guilt about that night for 28 years. Richard stared at her. What kind of guilt? Raymond says the man knew. When he responded to the scene, he knew there had been someone there before him. A neighbor saw a car, described it. Raymond's car. And the paramedic put it in an initial report, and then she paused. And then the report was amended. The reference to the vehicle was removed. The air went out of the parking lot. Marco's voice came out very low. Someone pressured the paramedic to change the report. Your father paid him, Rosa said. And she said it looking directly at Richard because she understood that this was the thing Richard needed to hear from someone who would say it plainly. 28 years ago, Raymond Crane paid a first responder to remove a detail from an official emergency report. He told me just now because he said he needed it said out loud before he lost his nerve. She looked at both of them. The paramedic kept the original. He never destroyed it. Raymond says he still has it. Richard turned and walked straight back into the room. Raymond looked up from the chair. His face was worn down to something raw and honest, the way faces get when crying strips away the last of the performance. The paramedic, Richard said. His name. Dennis Farrell, Raymond said without hesitation, like he'd been waiting to say it. Columbus, Ohio. He was 26 that night, first year on the job, and he kept the original report. He told me so. About a month ago, I tracked him down. I needed to know if it still existed. He said he'd kept it in a lockbox. He said he'd been waiting for someone to ask for it. 28 years, Marco said from the doorway. He had followed Richard back in. 28 years this man has been waiting. People wait a long time when they don't know who to tell, Raymond said. He looked at Marco when he said it, and the double meaning was not lost on anyone in the room. Richard pulled out his phone. He called Gus Hartley. Gus answered on the second ring. That was fast. You find your mystery car. I need you to find someone, Richard said. Dennis Farrell, retired paramedic, Columbus, Ohio, age 73. I need a phone number. Today. A beat. Then Gus said, Bobby, what are you into? The old name. Richard didn't correct him this time. Something that's been waiting a long time to be finished, he said. I'll explain later. Fine, Farrell. Give me an hour. He hung up. He looked at Marco. If Farrell has the original report, if it contains what my father says it contains, that's evidence. Real evidence. Not just a civil case, potentially criminal. For him, Marco said, nodding toward Raymond. Yes. Marco was quiet. I know what you're thinking, Richard said. You've spent 4 years building a case against me. Lawyers, documentation, a plan, and now it turns out the real case is against a dying 78-year-old man who has maybe 6 months and who is the only person left in your life who remembers your sister's laugh. Marco sat on the edge of one of the beds. He sat there with his hands on his knees and his shoulders curved slightly forward, and he looked in that moment not like the man who had orchestrated a 4-year plan of revenge, but like a 44-year-old boy who had lost his sister when he was 16 and never fully recovered, and was only now in a motel room in a city he didn't live in, starting to understand that recovery was not going to look anything like what he'd expected. What do you want to do with it? Marco asked Richard. The report, Farrell, all of it. What do you actually want? Richard looked at the photograph still in his breast pocket. He could feel the edge of it through the fabric. He thought about Elena squinting into the sun with her hand half raised. I want her to exist somewhere official, he said. I want there to be a record, a real accurate legal record of what happened to her, not the amended version, not the version my father paid for. The true one, he paused. Whether that results in charges, whether it results in anything beyond existing, that's not up to me. That's up to the system. But I'm not burying it again. Marco looked at him for a long time, then he said, My lawyer is good, but he's been building the wrong case. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. He stepped outside again. Rosa sat down on the edge of the second bed. She looked exhausted, and Richard realized with a fresh wave of guilt that she had been on her feet for most of the past 3 hours with a bruised face and a split lip that probably needed stitches. And she had not complained once, not a single time, not even when she'd insisted on driving. You need a hospital, he said, tonight, when this is done. I know, she said, which surprised him because he'd expected an argument. I'll take you. I know, she said again. He sat down across from her. Why did you really come today? The real reason, not the practical one. She looked at him steadily. Because someone needed to make sure you didn't run, she said. You have a long history of running, Mr. Calloway, and today was the one day in 28 years when running was not an option. So I came to make it harder. You barely know me, he said. I know you better than you think, she said. I've cleaned your house for 6 years. I've seen what you keep and what you throw away. I've seen the books on your shelves that you've read 100 times and the ones you bought and never opened. I know you drink your coffee black and you can't sleep past 5, and you iron your own shirts, even though that is literally part of what you pay me to do because you need to feel useful. She paused. I know you keep exactly 1 photograph in the house. 1. and it's in a drawer in the study face down. I never looked at it. I just noticed it was there and that it was face down, and I understood that some grief is stored horizontally. Richard was very still. Is it her? Rosa asked. The photograph in the drawer. No, he said. It's my mother. She died when I was 12. Rosa absorbed that. Then you've been storing two griefs horizontally for a very long time. He didn't have an answer for that. Marco came back through the door. His posture had changed, something in the shoulders, a decision made. My lawyer is shifting the focus of the case. He's going to contact Betrayal directly. If the original report is what Raymond says it is, we move forward with that. He looked at Richard. That means the case against you, the civil suit I was building, is effectively suspended for now. Richard said nothing. I'm not dropping it entirely, Marco said. Don't misunderstand me. You still owe something. To her memory, to the life she didn't get to live. I haven't decided what that looks like yet. But it won't be a lawsuit. That's not... He stopped. That was never really about money, and I think I always knew that. Then what was it about? Richard asked. Making you feel it, Marco said simply. Making you understand the size of it, the full weight of what you walked away from. He looked at Richard. Do you actually feel it? Richard thought about 28 years of careful silences. Thought about a name change that was really a burial. Thought about Rosa on his kitchen floor with a note in her bleeding hand. Thought about his father crying into his hands in a motel chair, while a man who had become his unlikely family read a 5-page apology on yellow legal paper. Yes, Richard said, I feel all of it. Marco nodded once. He sat down on the bed beside Rosa, which seemed to surprise both of them, and he said, she had a name picked out. For the baby. She told me when she was maybe 5 months along. She wouldn't tell our parents yet, but she told me. He was looking at the floor. She was going to name him Daniel. She said it meant God is my judge, and she thought that was funny because she was not particularly religious, Elena, but she liked the idea of a name that was a complete sentence. A small pause. Daniel Robert. She was going to use your name. Even then, even after everything. He looked at Richard. I thought you should know that. The breath left Richard's body so completely that for a moment he couldn't pull it back in. Daniel Robert. She had used his name, even when she was alone, even when he had stopped calling. Rosa reached out and put her hand briefly over Richard's. Just for a second, just a light touch, the kind of touch that doesn't demand anything, but says clearly, I see you and you are not going to fall. Then she withdrew it. Richard pressed his lips together, breathed again. Thank you, he said to Marco. His voice was barely functional. Thank you for telling me that. Marco looked away. Don't thank me. I debated not telling you. A pause. I still think maybe I shouldn't have. But you did. She would have wanted you to know, Marco said. She was more generous than any of us. That was always the problem. She loved people who didn't deserve it yet and then stayed until they did. He stood up abruptly, needing to move. She would have forgiven you. She probably already had. That's the thing I've never been able to make peace with, that she would have forgiven you and I can't. His voice broke on the last word and he moved to the window. I can't do what she would have done. I'm not her. No one is asking you to be, Rosa said quietly. Marco turned to look at her. She doesn't know any of us, he said to Richard not unkindly. And she's the most reasonable person in this room. She has that effect, Richard said. From the chair, Raymond spoke for the first time in several minutes. His voice was thin, but clear. Marco. He waited until Marco looked at him. I need to say something to you that I should have said in Phoenix, in person, not in a letter. He paused. I am not going to ask you to forgive me. I am not going to tell you that what I did was a mistake, because a mistake is something that happens. What I did was a choice. I made it clearly and deliberately, and I remade it every day for 28 years, every time I chose not to speak. He held Marco's gaze. You have every right to take everything I've given you, the information, the report, Dennis Farrell's name, all of it, and you have every right to hand it to a prosecutor and watch me spend whatever time I have left in a courtroom. I will not fight it. I am telling you that plainly. Marco stared at him. But I want you to know, Raymond continued, that the baseball games and the birthday party and the dinners, none of that was strategy. None of it was about softening you up or managing you. I went to Columbus because I was dying and I was alone and I needed to find someone who loved Elena. That was the whole truth of it. I needed to be around someone who loved her. His voice faltered just slightly. And you were that person. You are that person. And I know I don't deserve what you gave me. I know that. The room was completely silent. Marco stood at the window for a long moment. Then he turned around. His expression was not forgiving. It was far too complicated for that clean word, but it was something. It was the expression of a man who has arrived at a place he did not expect and is trying to take an honest inventory of what he finds there. Call Farrell, Marco said to Richard. When your friend gets the number, call Farrell. I want to talk to him directly before anything else moves. Agreed, Richard said. And Marco pointed at Richard, and the directness of it was not aggressive, just very real. You are going to Millhaven before any of this goes to a lawyer or a court or a newspaper or anywhere else. You are going to go to Millhaven and you are going to stand at Elena's grave and you are going to say the things to her that you should have said 28 years ago. He held Richard's gaze. Not for me, not for a case or a record or anything practical. For her, because she named her son after you and she died alone and she deserves to have someone stand at her grave and mean it. Richard said, I'll go. I know, Marco said. I'm going with you. Richard blinked. I haven't been back since the funeral, Marco said. I've been avoiding it because I thought if I went back, I'd have to accept that it was real, that there wasn't going to be any justice, any resolution, any... He stopped. But it's real. It's been real this whole time, and I've been running parallel to it for 28 years instead of going through it. He looked at Rosa. You said that in different words earlier. You said something like that. I said running doesn't work, Rosa said. I'm glad it landed. You're coming too, Marco said to her. It came out as a statement, but there was a question embedded in it, tentative, in the way that an invitation from someone who doesn't easily extend invitations tends to be tentative. Rosa looked at him, then at Richard, then back at Marco. Someone has to make sure he doesn't run, she said. Despite everything, Marco almost smiled. Yeah, he said, exactly. Richard's phone buzzed. Gus Hartley, he answered. Tell me you found him. Dennis Farrell, Gus said. Columbus. I've got a landline and a cell, but Bobby, I need to tell you something. Farrell didn't wait. I reached out through a former colleague of mine who knows him, just to get a feel before I gave you the number. And my colleague says Farrell has been trying to reach someone about this for months. He says Farrell told him, a pause. He says Farrell told him a woman came to see him about 3 months ago, young woman, late 20s, said she was doing research. Asked him about a call he responded to in Millhaven, 1997. Richard went cold. What woman? He didn't know her name, but Bobby, she showed up with a photograph of Raymond Crane. The room had gone very quiet. Everyone was watching Richard's face. She knew, Richard said. Someone else knew. Before any of this. Before the note, before Marco, before any of it. Somebody was already pulling the thread, Gus confirmed. 3 months before your housekeeper found that note on your doorstep, somebody was already in Columbus, talking to Farrell with a photograph of your father. Richard lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Marco. Did you send anyone to Columbus 3 months ago? A woman? Marco frowned. No, my lawyer made some calls, but nobody went to Columbus in person. I would have known. His frown deepened. Why? Richard looked at Rosa. Rosa looked at Richard, and in the quiet of a motel room in the middle of a Tuesday that had already dismantled more than most years could manage, a new shape began to form at the edges of everything they thought they understood about this day. Someone else was out there. Someone who had known about Elena Vasquez and Raymond Crane and Dennis Farrell long before any note was written or any plan was made. Someone who had been quietly pulling the thread from a direction none of them had thought to look. And Richard Calloway had absolutely no idea who it was. He put the phone back to his ear. Gus, he said, I need everything Farrell remembers about that woman. Everything. What she looked like, what she said, what questions she asked, everything. Already on it, Gus said. Bobby, one more thing. Farrell said the woman before she left, she told him something. A pause. She said the truth has a way of finding its way home. It just sometimes needs a little help. The line went quiet. Richard stood in the middle of that motel room with his dying father in a chair and Elena's brother on the edge of a bed and the woman who cleaned his house watching him with steady dark eyes, and he understood in a way that reached all the way down to whatever Robert Crane had once been, that today was not the end of anything. It was in fact only the beginning of what someone else had already set in motion. Gus Hartley gave Richard the description in under 3 minutes. Late 20s, dark hair, small, 5'3", maybe 5'4". She had driven herself to Columbus in a car with Ohio plates, asked her questions calmly, like someone who had rehearsed them, and then she had left Dennis Farrell with a business card that had nothing on it except a phone number. No name, no company, just 10 digits. Gus read the number out loud. Richard's hand went tight around the phone. He knew the area code. He had memorized it 11 years ago when he hired a private investigator to locate Marco Vasquez in Phoenix, and the investigator had given him a secondary report, unrequested, unpaid for, about other members of Elena's extended family still living in Ohio. Millhaven and its surrounding counties, a 740 area code, rural Ohio. She's from Millhaven, Richard said. Could be, Gus said. You want me to run the number? Yes, right now. Call you back in 10. Richard lowered the phone. The room was watching him, Marco from the edge of the bed, Rosa from the chair. She'd finally quietly taken Raymond from his corner with the particular attention of a man who has nothing left to protect and is therefore capable of seeing everything very clearly. What is it? Marco asked. The woman who went to see Farrell, Richard said. She's from Millhaven, or connected to it. Marco went still. How do you know? The phone number she left. Ohio area code, rural. Richard was moving through it out loud, needing to hear it. She had a photograph of my father. She knew about the 1997 call specifically. She knew to go to Farrell. That's not someone who stumbled onto this. That's someone who knew where to look. He paused. Someone who had a reason to look. Raymond made a sound from his chair. Not a word, just a sound. Everyone turned to look at him. The old man's face had gone a color that Richard had never seen on it before. Not gray, not pale, but the particular translucence of a person whose blood has redirected itself to somewhere more urgent than the skin. Dad, Richard said. The word came out before he thought about it. He hadn't called Raymond that in 11 years. What do you know, Mom? Raymond opened his mouth, closed it, pressed his lips together so hard they went white at the edges. What do you know? Richard said, again louder. Bobby, right now, whatever it is right now. Raymond looked at Marco first, and that involuntary redirect, that instinct to look at Marco before his own son, told Richard something he couldn't yet name, but felt land in his chest like a stone. The baby, Raymond said. His voice was so low it was barely sound. The baby didn't die. The room didn't react immediately. The words sat there for a full 2 seconds, just floating in the air, not quite real. Then Marco was on his feet. What did you say? Elena's baby, Raymond said. The boy. He closed his eyes. He didn't die. Marco crossed the room in 3 steps and stood over Raymond Crane with an expression that had gone beyond anger into something rawer and more dangerous. The expression of a man whose entire architecture of grief has just been handed a new blueprint. Say that again, he said. Say exactly what you just said. The baby survived, Raymond said. He opened his eyes and looked up at Marco, and he did not flinch. Whatever he was owed, he was going to take it standing or sitting, in this case in a motel chair at 78 years old with a failing heart. Elena died, but the baby, the boy, he was premature. He was in the NICU for 6 weeks, but he survived. A pause that contained 28 years in it. I paid to have him placed for adoption. Private, quietly. I told everyone he hadn't made it. I told the hospital. He stopped. I had a lawyer. People were paid. It was done. Richard could not speak. He was standing in the middle of the room, and he could not speak, and he could not move, and the photograph in his breast pocket felt like it was burning straight through the fabric into his skin. You hid my nephew, Marco said. His voice had dropped to something that was almost a whisper, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. You hid Elena's son. You took him from the only family he had left, and you paid people to pretend he was dead. Yes, Raymond said, where Marco's jaw was shaking. Where did he go? What family? What name? I don't know the adoptive family's name, Raymond said. That's the truth. The lawyer handled it. He died 12 years ago. The records, he stopped. I tried to find the records 2 years ago. When I found out I was dying, I tried to find them, and I couldn't. You tried to find him, Richard said. He had found his voice. It came out very flat and very precise. After 28 years, you tried to find the child you hid. Yes. And when you couldn't find him, that's when you called Marco. A pause. Yes. Because you thought Marco might be able to find him. Through his connections, his lawyer, whatever resources he'd built up in 4 years of building a case. Richard's voice was still flat, still precise, the way a voice gets when the alternative is screaming. You used Marco's anger to try to find Elena's son. That's what this has been. Raymond did not deny it. Marco sat down on the floor, not in a chair, not on the bed on the floor, with his back against the bed frame and his hands on his knees. And the posture of it was so unguarded and so exhausted that Rosa made a small, involuntary sound. He's out there, Marco said. To no one, to the floor. Elena's boy is out there somewhere. He's 28 years old. He's been alive for 28 years and none of us knew. Richard's phone rang. Gus Hartley. Richard answered before the first ring finished. The number, Gus said, registered to a Daniel Vasquez, 28 years old, address in Millhaven, Ohio. A pause. Bobby, the last name is Vasquez, not a married name birth record, has it his given name. Daniel, last name Vasquez. Richard stopped breathing. He found his own family, Gus said quietly. Somebody told him enough to find the Vasquez name and he took it. That's my read anyway. Another pause. Bobby, he's been living in Millhaven for 3 years. He moved back there at 25. He works at the county records office. Gus's voice dropped. He's been reading records, buddy. That's what he does for work. He's been sitting in the county records office in Millhaven, Ohio, reading every document this county has ever produced, and 3 months ago, he drove to Columbus and sat across from Dennis Farrell with a photograph of your father. Richard turned to the room. 3 faces watching him. Marco on the floor, Rosa in the chair, Raymond with his hands folded and his eyes closed and his jaw set with the particular stillness of a man waiting for a sentence to be pronounced. Daniel Vasquez, Richard said, 28 years old, lives in Millhaven. He found the Vasquez name on his own. He looked at Marco. He found your family on his own. He's been trying to find the truth about where he came from for at least 3 years, maybe longer. Marco put his face in his hands. The sound he made was not crying exactly. It was the sound of something enormous moving through a person who has no idea how to contain it. He's alive, Marco said from behind his hands. He's alive, and he's in Millhaven, and he figured it out himself. Elena's boy figured it out himself. He lowered his hands. His eyes were wet, and his expression was something Richard had no word for because there was no single word for the simultaneous experience of the most profound grief and the most profound relief a person has ever felt at the same time. He has her name. He gave himself her name. He didn't give himself her name, Richard said quietly. He found it. He went looking and he found it and he claimed it. That's different. He paused. That's completely different. Rosa spoke. Call him, she said. Everyone looked at her. You have his number, she said to Richard. Gus gave it to you. Call him right now before another minute passes. Call him. Richard looked at his number on his phone. 10 digits. A young man, 28 years old, sitting somewhere in Millhaven, Ohio. Maybe at work. Maybe at home. Maybe somewhere in between. Having spent 3 years reading records and driving to Columbus and leaving business cards with no names on them. Pulling a thread as carefully and quietly as his mother had once drawn tiny birds in the corners of grocery lists without even realizing she was doing it. He dialed. It rang twice, then a voice young, slightly wary, the voice of someone who has learned to be careful about unexpected calls. Hello, Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Hello, the voice said again. Daniel. Richard's voice broke on the single word and he didn't try to fix it. My name is Richard Calloway. I was born Robert Crane. I lived in Millhaven when I was 23 years old. I knew your mother. He stopped, started again. I am your father. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 4 seconds. Richard counted them. Then Daniel Vasquez said very quietly, I know who you are. Richard exhaled. I've known for almost a year, Daniel said. I found your name in the amended hospital report, the version they kept, not the original. Your name wasn't in it, but your father's was buried in a notation, and I traced it from there. His voice was steady, careful. The voice of someone who has rehearsed this conversation many times and is now discovering that rehearsal and reality are not the same country. I didn't contact you because I needed to understand the whole picture first. I needed to know what actually happened he stopped, before I decided what to do with it. And do you, Richard said, know the whole picture? I know most of it, Daniel said. I know my mother died. I know I was placed for adoption. I know the people who adopted me were kind people who told me when I was 18 that I was adopted and that my birth mother had died and that they didn't have any more information than that. I know that was a lie, not their lie. They were told what they were told. And I know that I spent the next 10 years finding the truth piece by piece, like someone putting together a puzzle in the dark. A pause. I know about Dennis Farrell. I know about the original report. And I know, his voice shifted slightly. I know about Marco, my uncle. I haven't contacted him yet. I wasn't sure how. Marco was on his feet. Richard held the phone out toward him without a word. Orsvan. Marco took it. His hand was shaking. He put the phone to his ear and he said, Daniel. Just the name, just that. And then he stopped. Because Daniel had said something on the other end, and whatever it was, it did what 28 years of anger and 4 years of legal strategy in a 5-page letter on yellow legal paper had not been able to do. It made Marco Vasquez break completely open right there in the middle of a motel room, in front of people he barely knew, without any defenses left to reach for. She talked about you, Marco managed. She talked about you all the time. Before you were born, she said she was going to raise someone who was too brave to be small. Those were her exact words. His voice was barely functional. She was already raising you to be brave. She was already... He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Rosa had stood up at some point without Richard noticing, and she was standing beside Raymond Crane's chair with one hand on the old man's shoulder, not forgiving him, not absolving him, just keeping him present for this moment that he had set in motion and that had grown so far beyond what he intended that it had become something none of them could have predicted or planned for. Raymond had his eyes open. He was listening to Marco's voice, and whatever he was feeling, he was letting himself feel it, which was perhaps the only truly new thing Raymond Crane had done in 78 years of living. Marco spent 12 minutes on the phone with Daniel Vasquez. Richard stood to the side and did not rush him, and did not look at his watch, and did not do any of the small, efficient things he habitually did to manage time. He just stood there and let the 12 minutes be what they were. When Marco finally lowered the phone, his face was wrecked and luminous at the same time, which is the specific combination that happens when something devastating turns out to also be a gift. He wants to meet, Marco said. He's been in Mill Haven for 3 years. He's been going to her grave regularly. He found it the same week he moved back. Marco looked at Richard. He said he's been talking to her, telling her what he finds, like filing reports. His voice caught. He said he told her 6 months ago that he thought he was getting close, that he thought the truth was almost ready to come out. He paused. He said she would have liked that she always believed the truth could find its own way if you gave it enough room. Richard thought about the note on his doorstep. Make sure he reads it. He thought about a woman in her 20s driving to Columbus with a photograph, leaving a phone number with no name, pulling a thread from a direction no one had thought to look. He thought about 28 years of a story that had been told wrong, and the patience it must have taken, the extraordinary inherited patience of Elena Vasquez, to spend 3 years quietly correcting it from the inside. He was already doing it, Richard said, before any of this, before Marco's plan, before the note, before today. Daniel was already dismantling it from the inside. He just needed it to finish breaking open. He needed people to be in the same room, Rosa said quietly. He's been arranging pieces for 3 years. He couldn't make you face each other. He couldn't make your father confess. He couldn't make Farrell talk. All he could do was get close enough to the truth that the pressure became unavoidable. She looked at Richard. The note wasn't just Marco's plan. Someone made sure Marco's plan happened now. Someone made sure the timing aligned. Richard looked at Marco. The note, who actually arranged it? Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my lawyer drafted the letter. But the timing when to send it, how to send it through your housekeeper specifically, that was a suggestion. Someone called my lawyer's office 2 months ago. An anonymous tip suggested the approach. A young woman, Richard asked. Marco closed his eyes briefly. I don't know. My lawyer took the call. He said it was someone who seemed to know a great deal about your daily routine, your housekeeper's schedule, everything. He opened his eyes. Daniel. He set the board, Richard said, and then he let everyone else make the moves. Rosa made a sound that was almost a laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so precisely the act of someone who had learned patience from a woman who put tiny birds in the corners of grocery lists. He's very much her son, she said. Richard reached into his breast pocket. He took out the photograph, Elena squinting in the sun, her hand half raised against the light. He looked at it for a moment. Then he walked to Marco and held it out. Marco took it. He looked at it for a long time. His jaw worked. He pressed his lips together. Then he said, "Where did you get this?" "The lockbox," Richard said. "Your father Raymond had it." Marco looked at Raymond. The old man met his gaze. Between them passed something that had no clean name and required none. It was the look of two people who have arrived at a place they cannot leave, tied to each other by a grief that belongs to both of them and belongs to neither of them, and who have somehow, improbably in the wreckage of the worst year of both their lives, become the only witnesses the other one has. "Keep it," Marco said, handing the photograph back to Richard. "You should keep it. I have memories." "You have," he paused, "you have a lot of ground to cover." Richard took the photograph back. He put it in his pocket, but this time he put it face up, right side up, the way photographs are meant to be carried. They left for Millhaven the next morning. All of them. Richard drove. Rosa sat in the passenger seat with her properly stitched lip and her properly treated eye. Richard had taken her to urgent care the night before, sat in the waiting room for 2 hours without complaint, bought her coffee from the vending machine that she drank without acknowledging, but also without putting down. Marco rode in the back with Raymond, whose cardiologist had been called, who had been declared stable enough to travel short distances, who had said nothing when told they were going to Millhaven except good. Patricia Crane had gone home to Scottsdale. She had hugged Richard in the parking lot of the motel with the fierce grip of an 81-year-old woman who has been waiting 50 years to do exactly that, and she had said into his shoulder, "Your mother would be proud of you." And Richard had held on for a moment longer than he'd intended and said nothing, because some things don't need an answer, just a witness. They drove 4 hours. The conversation in the car was not constant. It came in bursts, then fell into silences that were not comfortable exactly, but were honest, which is sometimes better. Marco told stories about Elena in the back seat, small ones, the way she burned toast every single time without exception and refused to acknowledge it as a pattern. The time she argued with a gas station attendant for 20 minutes about the correct pronunciation of a town name and turned out to be wrong, and apologized so graciously that the attendant looked genuinely moved. The way she could make anyone feel within 10 minutes of meeting her that they were the most interesting person she'd ever encountered. Richard listened to every word. Rosa listened too, and occasionally she asked a small question, not to redirect the story but to deepen it. What did she study? What did she want to be? Did she have a favorite song? And Marco answered each one like someone unlocking a room that had been sealed for too long and finding with relief that the things inside were still intact. Raymond slept for most of the drive, which was the kindest thing his body could offer anyone in that car. Daniel Vasquez was waiting for them at the cemetery. He was standing near the gate when the car pulled up, and Richard saw him before anyone else did, and the sight of him was the single most destabilizing moment of the entire day, which had contained a significant number of destabilizing moments. He was 28 years old, dark-haired. He had Elena's cheekbones, undeniably, unmistakably the same architecture of bone and line. But his eyes and the set of his jaw and the way he was standing with his shoulders slightly squared and his hands loose at his sides, patient, watchful, ready, those were Robert Crane's, those were Richard's. The combination was so precise and so complete that Richard had to stop walking for a moment just to absorb the fact of it. Daniel looked at him across the distance. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He looked at Richard the way a person looks at something they have been imagining for years and is now determining how closely the reality matches the picture. Then he said, "You look like what I expected." "Is that good?" Richard asked. "I don't know yet," Daniel said. "Honest, careful." Elena's patience and Robert Crane's precision combined in a 28-year-old who had spent 3 years in a county records office teaching himself how to find the truth. "Ask me again in a year." "Okay," Richard said, "I will." Then Marco reached them, and what happened between Marco and Daniel was not something Richard could fully describe, because it was not something meant to be witnessed entirely. It was an uncle and a nephew meeting for the first time with 28 years of absence between them and the weight of Elena in every second of it. And it was private in the way that only the most important things are private, not hidden, just too full to be reduced to observation. Richard stepped back. Rosa was beside him. "You okay?" she said. "No," he said, "but I think that's correct." "Yes," she said, "it is." Daniel had arranged a small ceremony. Nothing formal, nothing planned, just the four of them and Rosa standing at Elena's grave while Daniel said a few words that he had clearly thought about for a long time and that were clearly not sufficient and were also clearly everything. He talked about the records he'd found, the photographs, the notes she had kept notes, Elena in the same way she'd drawn tiny birds, just small observations, fragments of thoughts, nothing meant for anyone else. Daniel had found them in a box that a neighbor had kept for 30 years, not knowing what to do with it, waiting for someone to come. "She wrote about you," Daniel said to Richard, and he said it without accusation, without softness, just as a fact. "Near the end, she wrote that she hoped you would find your way back to yourself someday, that she thought you were better than your fear." He paused. "She was right, by the way. I checked." Richard looked at him. 3 years of records," Daniel said with the smallest lift at the corner of his mouth, that was so precisely Elena's, that particular wry intelligence, that refusal to be entirely serious, even in serious moments that Richard had to look away for a second. "I know who you've been, what you've done, the small things, not just the big ones. I know you before you knew I existed." "I'm sorry," Richard said. He was looking at the headstone when he said it, at Elena's name, at the dates, at the space between them that represented everything. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry it took," his voice went, he steadied it. "I'm sorry it took someone else's courage to get me back here." He felt beside him, Daniel, not quite close enough to touch, but close enough for the proximity to be deliberate. "She forgave you," Daniel said quietly. "She wrote that too, that she'd already forgiven you. That forgiveness wasn't for you anyway, it was so she could carry the weight differently." A pause. "I'm working on it. The forgiving part. I'm not there yet." "I know," Richard said. "Take whatever time you need." "I might need a while." "I'll be here," Richard said. And the thing about those 3 words, the thing that made Rosa press her lips together briefly and look at the ground, was that they were not a promise about the future. They were a statement about the present, about the fact that Richard Calloway, who had been running since he was 23 years old, who had changed his name and bought a house and employed a woman for 6 years without ever asking her name, for her son was standing in a cemetery in Millhaven, Ohio, in the exact spot he should have come to decades ago, and was not moving. That evening, when the others had gone, Marco and Daniel, to a diner 2 blocks from the cemetery, talking in the low, urgent way of people who have years to cover and are trying not to rush it. Raymond back to the car with Rosa, keeping quiet and steady company. While he rested, Richard sat alone beside Elena's grave for a while. He talked to her. He said the things that needed saying. He didn't perform them, and he didn't make them neat, and he didn't time them or plan them. He just said them out in the open, where they'd been waiting to be said for 28 years. When he was done, he sat quietly for a while. The evening was coming in, and the air had that particular quality that autumn evenings in Ohio have, clear and slightly cold, and somehow both ending and beginning at the same time. He took the photograph out of his pocket, Elena squinting in the sun, her hand half raised, not quite blocking the light, not quite ready to stop feeling all of it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it carefully against the base of the headstone, propped upright against the granite so it faced out toward the world. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at her name on the stone. "I found him," he said. "He found us, actually. That was more his work than mine. He's extraordinary, Elena. He has your cheekbones and your patience, and he laughs like you laugh, I think. I think that's what it looked like. He's more than I deserved and exactly what you would have made." He stopped. "I'm going to know him. I'm going to show up for that, whatever it looks like, however long it takes. I promise you that." He turned and walked back toward the car. Rosa was waiting by the gate. She had a cup of coffee in each hand. She'd walked to the gas station down the road while Richard was sitting at the grave, and she held one out to him without a word when he reached her. He took it. They stood for a moment looking back at the cemetery in the last of the evening light, and Richard thought about all the careful distances he had maintained in his life, all the silences, all the mornings on the back porch with a newspaper keeping everything at exactly the right remove to prevent it from touching him. "Thank you," he said to Rosa, "for today, for all of it." "You already said that," she said. "I know, I'm saying it again." She looked at him sideways. "You're going to need to make some changes," she said. "In your life, real ones. Not just the legal things with the report and the lawyers, the actual daily texture of how you live." "I know," he said, "and I'm raising my rate," she added. "Whatever I was making before is not sufficient for what today required." He almost laughed. Almost. "Done," he said. "And I'm not cleaning the study anymore," she said. "You can clean the study yourself. That room has too many face-down photographs, and I am not responsible for what's in there." "Fair," he said. She looked back at the cemetery one more time. Then she finished her coffee, crushed the cup neatly in one hand, and said, "Let's go get your son." Richard Calloway looked at the woman beside him. This person he had not known for 6 years and had finally, on the longest day of his life, begun to see, and he nodded. They walked back to the diner together through the autumn Ohio evening, toward the table where Marco and Daniel were sitting across from each other, with their sleeves rolled up and their hands moving, in the particular energy of two people who have so much to say they can barely breathe around it. They could see them through the glass from half a block away, and even at that distance, even at the end of this day, the sight of it was enough to make something ease in Richard's chest that had been tight for so long he had stopped remembering it was there. He pushed open the diner door. Daniel looked up, met his eyes, and this time just slightly. Just at the corner, just enough, he smiled. That smile was the beginning of everything that came after. And Richard Calloway, who had once been Robert Crane, who had run from the truth for 28 years, who had been found not by a note on a doorstep or a plan built over 4 years, but by a 28-year-old who had inherited his mother's patience and his father's stubbornness, and had quietly, methodically, lovingly refused to let the truth stay buried, sat down at the table. And for the first time in a very long time, he stayed.